Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. It is the largest class action lawsuit settlement in Canadian history. The cost, $40 billion. As today, the federal government announced an agreement in principle to settle these lawsuits that cover First Nations children shortchanged by a woefully underfunded child welfare system. APTN's Fraser Needham has more.
It's been a long time coming, but Ottawa says it believes it has reached an agreement that will satisfy a 2019 Canadian Human Rights Tribunal order and also those covered under class action lawsuits going back to 1991. The price tag is $20 billion. The government's Indigenous Services Minister says lessons have been learned after decades of legal wrangling.
I hope the lesson that we're learning, as I said earlier, is that discriminatory funding for Indigenous people in this country is not just harmful and wrong and morally repugnant, but that it is shooting ourselves in the foot in terms of prosperity for the entire country.
AFN Regional Chief Cindy Woodhouse says a chronically underfunded system set up First Nations children and their families to fail.
This wasn't and isn't about parenting. It's in fact about poverty. And First Nations children being removed from their families and communities instead of being provided help with food, clothing, or shelter. The federal child welfare program was broken from the start.
Affected children and their families will be guaranteed a minimum of $40,000 each, but compensation on a case-by-case basis could be much higher. An additional $20 billion is going to overall reform of the First Nations child welfare system. One Ontario First Nations leader says Ottawa has finally set aside enough money to properly compensate the harms that have been done.
For our remote communities, empirical, math-based solutions to these problems have been unheard of. I'm proud that we have finally identified a promising way forward in this agreement in principle through meaningful structural change.
But children's advocate Cindy Blackstock says her organization is not ready to drop its complaint just yet.
When Canada has ceased its discrimination in the provision of First Nations Child and Family Services and Jordan's principle at the level of the child, that's where we measure it, not on paper. Are children no longer discriminated against in the way that the tribunal found?
The agreement is expected to cover an estimated 215,000 individuals. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Indigenous Services Minister Patty Hajdu joins us now to talk about the deal. Minister Hajdu, thanks for taking some time for us. These agreements in principle are non-binding and still need to be ratified, so what could go wrong here?
Well, I'd rather talk about what's gone right, actually. And what's gone right is for the first time in a very long time, all of the parties have sat down together, worked out, I would say, extremely difficult details to arrive at a fairly comprehensive agreement in principle. All have signed the agreement in principle and now are committed to the next work ahead, which is to flesh that agreement in principle out, get those details in place, and have a final agreement that that is to the satisfaction of all parties, but also is approved by the federal court and the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal.
Well, you know, a lot of people do believe this could be a historic moment here. It's a big deal, but Cindy Blackstock, who helped file this original complaint in 2007, said that, quote, nothing changes in the lives of children today. These are simply words on paper. So what would you say to Ms. Blackstock and others who could be concerned that this is another broken Liberal promise?
Well, I wouldn't call $40 billion a broken Liberal promise, Dennis. In fact, I want to thank Dr. Blackstock for being a signatory on the agreement in principle. Her signature is on it, as well as you know, AFN and the Chiefs of Ontario and the Anishinaabe Nation folks and Mishoom and Trout class litigators. You know, this is the result of conversations over the last 6 weeks that were, I would say, ongoing and persistent. I think Regional Chief Woodhouse said it best. There were difficult moments where people didn't agree on a path forward, but everyone committed to coming back to the table. And I will note that Honourable Murray Sinclair was a key ingredient in facilitating that conversation and keeping us all focused on what mattered, which was the future for Indigenous children, but certainly also a fair compensation regime for people that have been so harmed by discrimination and racist funding practices in the past.
seem confident this will move ahead. So tens of thousands of First Nations families and children are affected by this agreement in principle. Should it all move ahead smoothly, I should say, how quickly could they see compensation?
Well, certainly, I think everybody's focused now on the compensation and making sure that it's done in a fair, in an appropriate, and in a safe way, culturally safe way that doesn't re-traumatize individuals that have been traumatized, sometimes by a life of inequity. Many of us who have worked in community before politics will remember, the common experience payment and the independent experience payments that in some cases were very difficult for people to access, and some processes were very traumatizing, and that's why we've committed to First Nations partners that they'll lead the design of the compensation package. They'll put into place the appropriate approach that will ensure that compensation unfolds quickly, but also carefully in a way that meets the needs of Indigenous First Nations people that have been so harmed.
That said, though, Minister, are we talking weeks, months?
Well, it's hard to say. We need to get to a final agreement first, and of course, we're hoping to do that as quickly as possible. I will say that parties are hard at work already in what that final agreement will look like, and we'll be there. We'll be there for the First Nations leadership and organizations that will design this program. Our contribution, as you know, is a commitment to the adequate funding so that that compensation can unfold in a way that obviously will never restore people, but will certainly acknowledge the harms and help give people, some comfort that their harms are recognized.
Minister Haidu, we'll have to leave it there, but I appreciate you taking some time for us.
Thank you very much, Janice. Take care.
You can find much more on this story over on our website, aptnnews.ca. To the pandemic now, and a First Nation in northwestern Ontario is calling on the Canadian military for help with a COVID outbreak. Bearskin Lake declared a state of emergency after more than half of its 400 members tested positive. Michelle Karlinzig has more on that story.
Over half the community in Bearskin Lake First Nation have tested positive for COVID-19. Chief Lefty Kamanawatamin says he lost staff and health workers at an alarming rate.
I don't have a medical driver. I don't have a medical vehicle. And I don't have a person to answer the phone that is constantly ringing at the nursing station. And the workers are sick. And at the ban office, I don't have a receptionist or a secretary because they're positive.
The chief also is isolating after his son tested positive. He says the situation is dire and has called for help from Canada's government and military.
In the case of
This
Bearskin Lake, in
Minister of
addition to
Indigenous Affairs,
COVID-19
Patty
supports of
Haidu,
almost $4 million
addressed the First Nations crisis.
We've recently approved 2 additional funding allotments totaling about $900,000, and this is within days of receiving requests from the community.
The chief says he's thankful for the support, but due to lack of staff, he won't see that money anytime soon.
I only have one finance person working in the ban office now, so the finance department is depleted too. So it's really, really slow.
In the meantime, Bearskin Lake has received an outpour of support from neighboring communities like Big Trout Lake First Nation. They sent a team of snowmobiles filled with supplies in the frigid temperatures on New Year's Day. The chief said he's thankful.
There's so many communities that have stepped up with monetary donations, supplies, equipment. First Nations, businesses, organizations are contacting us to help. It just overwhelms me. It overwhelms me. It just speaks that the compassion a person has, a community has, in a time of need.
The chief says he hopes to be out of isolation in the coming days, and he can help check on the members of his community. Michelle Karlenzig, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
And for the first time since the pandemic began 2 years ago, COVID-19 has struck Indigenous communities in Labrador. Innu and Inuit communities there worry about a lack of health care. Shisashai Innu First Nation with 14 positive cases has gone into lockdown. At 350 kilometers north, the Inuit village of Nain has 15 confirmed cases. In Nain, all nurses but one are in isolation, while Central Labrador has 30 healthcare workers in isolation. The province is struggling to keep up with testing. Newfoundland has over 3,000 active cases, including over 600 in the Labrador-Grenfell region. The Northwest Territories are also grappling with a surge of COVID-19 cases. The Yukon is leading the north with almost 270 active cases. Nunavut is reporting just over 200 cases across 12 communities, the bulk of which are in Iqaluit, Arviat, and Rankin Inlet. Meanwhile, the Northwest Territories has around 150 active cases. NWT's medical director says the virus is spreading rapidly across the territory.
It's following those public health orders and keeping our circle small and our habits as they have been for the last number of months.
Across British Columbia, COVID cases are also surging. Over the Christmas break, a phased return to school was announced due to the impacts of the Omicron variant. Last week, BC students, kindergarten through grade 12, return to school was delayed until January 10th. On Monday, the province of BC reported over 9,300 new cases of COVID-19 over a 3-day period. Today, health officials gave an update on the rising cases.
Means that we are in a different race, in a different storm now. The Omicron variant of concern has taken over the Delta variant and is now the cause of over 80% of the new cases that we're seeing across British Columbia.
And the Alberta government has just released the first COVID-19 stats for 2022. To date, the province has recorded over 30,000 active cases and a test positivity rate of 30%. That isn't including positive results from at-home rapid tests. Premier Jason Kenney says hospitalization rates are expected to rise and calls on the federal government to take immediate action.
I'm calling on the Government of Canada to help us out with that by taking immediate action to authorize the use of Pfizer's COVID antiviral pill, Paxlovid, that was recently approved for emergency use in both Europe and the United States and other jurisdictions. We need to use every tool at our disposal, and this can be a helpful tool.
Time to step aside for a quick break now. Coming up, we'll take a look back at some of the big stories making news in 2021 in the NWT. Welcome back. In 2021, our Yellowknife Bureau brought you stories on land management, reconciliation, health, culture, and healing. Here's our reporter Charlotte Moore Jacobs with a look back on news from Northwest Territories.
NWTers kicked off 2021 when they rolled up their sleeves for the Moderna vaccine. Translators like Lena Drygeese were essential in the fight against COVID-19.
Because otherwise, if they don't get the vaccine and then they end up getting sick, they will probably question themselves, why didn't I just get a needle?
Squatters made headlines as the GNWT announced new measures to deal with the long-standing issue.
It's a nice cabin right there.
The Yellowknives Dene bear the brunt of the problem. Out of the 700 unauthorized structures, 500 are in their territory.
I think the government of North Territory needs to spruce themselves up and say we need to find another regime, how we do land management, how we take care of the land.
He told me to get out. As I was getting out, he dragged me.
The NWT Status of Women Council launched an anonymous taxi safety survey where patrons and cab drivers shared experiences and made recommendations.
There were some situations that, as a layperson, to me seemed criminal in nature.
This winter, APTN cruised the ice road north of Yellowknife to the Bathurst Caribou Mobile Management Area, where Indigenous governments launched a new harvesting monitoring program.
We just write down what they kill us. Some they're not honest with us, but we count their hit. One guy said, I got 10, but I count their hit was 12.
This spring, the Northwest Territories Métis Alliance voiced their frustration after their proposal to create an elders complex using new money from the federal government's Rapid Housing Initiative was rejected.
And we have never received 1 cent of housing funding from either the Government of Canada or the Government of the Northwest Territories through the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation.
In May, the Decho communities of Fort Simpson and Jean Marie River were devastated by flooding.
By the time we got into the truck, the second siren was going, and they said that the road towards my house was washed out.
Orange replaced red on July 1st as a large crowd gathered in Sambake to honor residential school survivors.
But what I ask Canadian governments and the churches, make it easier so we can forgive you.
In the summer, APTN also visited Jatiquin to learn about one of the only monuments in the country that honors unmarked graves. It pays tribute to the roughly 300 people buried nearby. A heartbreaking history for Pascalina Nadley, an intergenerational residential school survivor.
It brings me to tears to know that relatives will never see them again.
My grandfather, Andre, was 19 years old when treaty was signed in Toledo.
This summer marked 100 years since the last numbered treaty was signed in Canada, Treaty 11.
100!
We paddled the Satude from Delaunay to Toledo, the same historic journey that would have taken place in 1921. Commemorations honored Indigenous resiliency across Denendeh.
We're still here, and we're doing a lot of things better because of them signing 1921, and they never sold the land, the peace treaty.
In Bearskin, history was made with the first territorial, all-female, non-binary wildfire fighting training program.
There might not be trees in Tuck, but I mean, we're also learning about, the crawling fires and the running fires and, the different behaviors of fires.
In the federal election, the NWT saw a large voter turnout when they chose to give Michael McLeod another 4 years in Parliament.
We were hoping that we would have a majority. If we ever needed a new mandate, it's now during a pandemic.
Switching medical support this close to the due date is very jarring and very concerning because I don't know what they're going to be like. I don't know what their opinions are.
One of the most shocking headlines this year, the birthing crisis at Stanton Territorial Hospital.
It will be approximately $12,500 for the patient and her escort to go to Edmonton and stay there for 28 days.
Which continues to see expectant mothers having no choice but to travel to Edmonton to deliver their babies.
There's been so many people wanting to support the people in Yellowknife, like myself, that have to fly down, sometimes on very short notice. But I think it just speaks to the lack of understanding people have in the lack of medical support across the north, period.
We know it's going to be high traffic for the first day opening, right?
In good news, the mostly fly-in Clichon community of Wati became permanently connected by a 97-kilometer all-season road in November.
It's a very exciting time, and for Wati people, very economical.
We ended the year on the east arm of Tunade, Great Slave Lake, and Little Cay, hearing stories of determination, like that of the Gondale family.
Okay, now you can go over it with the blue.
Who continue to petition the territorial government to allow the proper spelling of Indigenous names on official documents.
And they're taking away our right to use our names and our right to use the proper spelling when they say that it is a priority to have them.
This lady here, Louise Boyo, she's the one that I connected with when I first
and reconnection for 60 Scoop survivor Theresa Harmon, who found her family after nearly 4 decades.
I could not understand why I would be taken away. It said in the CP's report that she was incompetent.
And a whole lot of healing through Indigenous-led workshops.
I mean, as Indigenous people and as Dene people, we have all those inner and external resources within us already.
Charlotte Moore-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
Thanks, Charlotte. Time for another quick break, but stick around. There's more to come. Welcome back. Time now for a look at Wednesday's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, +6 in Halifax, -1 in St. John's. 16 below in Kuujjuaq, 20 below in Nain. -1 in Montreal, 15 below in Chibougamau. -3 in Sault Ste. Marie, +1 for North Bay and Ottawa. 11 below in Thunder Bay and Wawa, -24 in Sioux Lookout. 25 below for God's Lake, Thompson, Norway House and the Paw. -14 in Winnipeg, 22 below for Brandon. -26 in Estevan, Regina and Saskatoon. -31 in Uranium City, 32 below in Buffalo Narrows. In northern Alberta, 32 below for High Level, -30 in Grand Prairie. -24 in Medicine Hat, 27 below in Edmonton. +2 for Vancouver, 3 in Victoria and Tofino. -24 in Prince George, 33 below in Fort Nelson. -26 in Old Crow and Rock River, -44 in Dawson. 33 below for Fort Simpson and Trout Lake. -15 in Sax Harbor, 27 below for Colville Lake. -31 in Whale Cove and Chesterfield. -23 in Resolute and Arctic Bay. Some sad news over the holidays. On Christmas Day morning, prominent comedian Candy Palmater passed away. The talented and funny star of the Candy Show was 53. Palmater's partner and manager, Denise Tompkins, made the announcement on social media that the Mi'kmaq comedian, activist, lawyer, and actor had passed away at home. A virtual memorial will take place soon. Here she is in Season 1 of The Candy Show from 2010.
I was a lawyer who then became a public servant who then got my own show. My whole life is about change and transformation.
Such sad news. What a talent. Candy will be missed by many. That is all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Tuesday. For news anytime, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. Thanks for being with us. Stick around for an encore presentation of Face to Face and our conversation with residential school survivor and warrior Geraldine Shingoose. We'll be back with all new episodes of Face to Face next Tuesday. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night.